Well, as I'm sure you can tell, I'm pretty down on the major labels. Yeah, I think that, you know, the music industry in general is foul and evil and dark, and it's a miracle anything can flower in that environment, you know, and it really does, in my opinion. I mean, there's a few people who have managed to take advantage of the major label system and make great art, you know. You got your Neil Young or Bob Dylan or, you know, whatever. There's things here and there that manage to exist in that world, but they're rare and they're getting rarer. So I think a lot of the shifting, even on their back catalogs, you know, these major labels are sitting on the entire history of music, which they claim to own, and they're not doing it justice. You know, their reissues are ugly or expensive or the wrong material or tasteless. So really a lot of the good stuff that's been going on that's sort of saving a store like mine and making it possible for me to stock new records is that there's this new flowering of all these small record labels. A lot of them specializing in reissues, which is amazing, mining the whole history of music and sort of even licensing stuff from major labels that the major labels consider it beneath them to even deal with because it sells in such small numbers. So you have all these labels like, you know, Honest John's and Sublime Frequencies and Light in the Attic and Numero Group and, you know, all these amazing small labels that are just managing to do justice to history in a way that the major labels aren't. And my store is like, you know, when I started, I was about 80% used records and 20% new. And the new ones I had were all like discount catalog stuff I'd get from weird, shady warehouses in New Jersey, you know, that had stuff sitting on the shelf since the 80s or something for $5 and I could sell them for $8, you know. So the new records were even pretty oddball. They weren't major label. But now it's shifted in my store, and my store is like 80% reissues and 20% used. And that's based largely on the fact, well, A, that when I get a good used record, sells the day I get it, if the price is right. Can't keep them on the shelf. So I have this replenishable supply, though, of reissues of old records that these small labels are doing. And so I've really grown to specialize that in that more and more, which has turned off a lot of collectors to our store. I mean, you can still find crazy stuff here, you know? You can walk in and maybe, you know, it's a dice roll. But if you're okay with reissues and you don't have to have the first edition perfect yada yada version of something, then this store is really interesting because it's filled with just reissues of stuff that you never thought you'd see, you know, and that was not available. I mean, it blows my mind. I look through the store. I never thought I could look through a blues section and see, you know, 200 great blues records in one blues section. 20 years ago, if you went through a blues section at any record store, except for a few crazy ones, you know, it was like a million horrific blues records and then there'd be that one good one. Now, because of this reissue boom, you can have a blues section with 200 good blues records that I could recommend to a customer. Like, you should have all 200 of these, you know? Why don't you spend $3,000? You know? So, and that's a really new thing, you know? It was never like that before. Usually, back in the day, it was always what was new and just out, and then whatever happened to come in used, which was usually bad because people kept the good records, you know? So the record store was a lot more, it was more of a treasure hunt and more difficult. And now we're living in this golden age of reissues and people don't even notice it, like all golden ages, you know? Like when the psychedelic 60s were going down, people didn't know that there was something beautiful at the core of it until after it was over and they historicized it. And now, as far as record stores go, this is the golden age of reissues. Small label reissues. And people will realize it 20 years from now when they're collecting all these crazy things that they make 500 copies of some psych record that was $5,000 before and now you could get it for 15 bucks but just for a little while because it's 500 copies, you know. Like these will be the collectibles of 20 years from now is this crazy flourishing of reissues, and it's really interesting. And you know, new records, I mean, that's a whole different thing that I don't know as much about, new bands and stuff, but a lot of new bands too are doing really beautiful artisan small edition records that will be the collectibles of tomorrow or whatever. So it's an interesting moment, and I don't think people are really appreciating it, like the fact that you can find all this stuff right now, and it's not going to last either. It's not sustainable. I mean, Portland is an exception. You know, we have all these stores that are willing to go down this road and sort of specialize in all these strange little genres. You know, we have a store, we have Clinton Street Records that's disco and boogie specialty, like, and does just fine, you know. Right down the street from me, like 2 blocks from here, I have Green Noise that is a punk specialist. And then we also have Blackwater over there, which is a different kind of punk specialist. And then we have Exiled Records, which is kind of like Mississippi, but more more geared towards the psychedelic and a slightly different aesthetic, you know. And then right up the street, there's Musique Plastique, which is like this incredible store that just does primarily used records and specializes in like avant-garde and no wave and new wave and you know, kind of edgy stuff like that. So it's like there, you know, this is a very exceptional environment. There's not a lot of cities that can sustain this many specialty stores, and you know, right now we're in a fortunate position where the world seems to be on our page a little bit. Like there's enough interest. We get tourists from all over the world even coming just to pick at all these stores, but I don't. And it might be sustainable here, but I don't know about the rest of the world. Portland's pretty unique in that, well, let me think about that for a second. I mean, when I moved here in 1989, Portland seemed really unusual to me because there was a small business culture that I had never seen in any other city. It seemed like any kid who had any weird idea could start a store. So you'd have like, somebody would be like, I'm gonna start a cafe wherever there's telephones on every table and you can call your friends, you know, and make all your telephone calls called the telecafe, and that would open and some kid would have $1,000 and start a business somehow. Like you could do that, and rent was cheap enough, the laws were laxed enough. You know, we had a lot of music clubs like that too that would just spring up out of nowhere, just some kid who would manage to cobble together $400 a month to pay the rent, and I guess we can start a music club, you know, like all we have to have is a PA and we're good. So it was a very DIY culture here, and it was small, but it was here, and that sort of foundational stone is as close to a culture as we ever had in Portland. There's all these other cultures, but Portland is very segregated, you know, and for a lot of kids, it was like that was sort of the dream, was to have a weird little business. And that sort of seemed, there was a romanticism here, like that was the best way you could ever live, is to have a small business, you know. And so that romanticism never stopped, and it became almost like a cultural force by the 2000s, where more than anywhere else I've ever been, there's this fetishism for small business and for it as a lifestyle. So most of these record stores, none of them are really making much money, you know. They're all mostly staffed by the owners who are sitting behind the counters. They can rarely afford to just hire a staff and be at home counting their money. That doesn't happen. And I think that they're not doing it for the money, believe it or not. I know that sounds like a line, but it's true. There's a value system that's pretty different than other places, where it's like, well, you can't make money off a small record store unless you're corrupt and evil, you know, unless you're ripping people off all the time or you're charging too much for your records, you can't make money off this business. And the record stores in Portland, I don't think any of them are corrupt, which is crazy. And you can't make it here if you are, because there's too much competition. There's 39 stores, you know, like good luck starting a shitty record store in Portland. It's not gonna work out for you. Don't even try it. So there's a leveling, you know. When you have 39 stores and that much competition, on the one hand, none of us get to make any money, which is fine. But on the other, we're all our better stores, because we have to look at each other and say, okay, what are they paying for records? What are they charging for records? Well, I can't get away with too much more of that, then I'll look like an asshole. So suddenly you have a culture where we're all keeping each other in check. Now, if you go to New York City, there's no culture for that. There's nobody keeping each other in check, you know? Here, all the record store owners, we go to each other's stores, we look around, we say, okay, my price point is well enough within range of this. I'm gonna go ahead and go on the record as saying I probably helped ruin the chances of anybody making money in this town, because when I started Mississippi, I dived the price point down a lot on records. Music Millennium, though, which is like the big record store, you know, or Every Day, which is the big store, their prices aren't bad compared to most cities, you know, and so they also leveled everything down. Like in other cities, you know, it used to be you go to the Tower Records and the price was a little crazy sometimes. Those guys kind of kept it real. So it's really like maybe, I mean, it's just a theory, but maybe that's why we are okay in a good record store city, is because we all keep each other in check. Good as theory as anything, I don't know. All the record stores in Portland are friendly with each other, more or less. You know, I'm not going to name names, but there were people who came and went on the scene who weren't that cool. But you can't make it if you're not cooperating with everyone else. I mean, we even have like a record store guide that everyone participates in, you know, and it's sort of a symbol of how cooperative we are. If a tourist comes in and asks, you know, you see what kind of records they're buying, and then you pull out the guide and you circle the stores that will be interesting to them. All those stores do that for each other, you know, and that's pretty amazing. The only thing I think that there's any sort of cutthroat competition on is there is a limited well of used records in Portland, and the demand has far exceeded the supply on used records. So there's, you know, we're all kind of hounds for that, and we all have our different ways of doing it. You know, you look at Little Axe Records, which you should definitely go visit. Little Axe, those guys get up early in the morning or at estate sales. They're pounding the pavement. They're following every lead, and thus they have an amazing used store. You know, they are not lazy. The same with Music Plastique up the stairs. Incredibly unlazy, incredibly like go get 'em and powerful. Crossroads Music is a store that has, what is it, like 30 vendors, I think, all different people, and and most of the people vending there are hardcore record diggers, so they're out pounding the pavement looking for this stuff. Then you get a lazy bum like me. I just sit here and people bring in collections, and I'm so lucky because I'm too lazy to do any of that. But as a result, what I do is I just pay a little bit higher than everyone else, so that way even some of the record dealers will come in who don't want to deal with selling the stuff on eBay or something if it's cheaper stuff, and sell me stuff because I'll pay them out at like 60% of retail. So for them, it's worth it for, you know, stuff that is kind of a pain to sell elsewhere. So I have sort of the lazy man's technique, but we have our own techniques, and we're definitely competitive for used records, but friendly, but competitive. But as far as for customers, I think the feeling is the same for all of us, that, you know, there's plenty of customers to go around, and it's creepy to try to corner people into being loyalists for your store. That's absurd. Half of the fun of Portland is that you can take a whole day or 5 days and drive around and go to every single store. I mean, it helps us all, you know, because it creates a culture and a sort of activity that wouldn't be there if there was just 1 or 2 stores. I mean, I enjoy like a day. I never get to do it anymore because I'm busy, but I used to love a day when I would just wake up in the morning and be like, I'm going to visit all the stores. And this is when I have a store. It's a busman's holiday, they call it, you know. But I would love being able to just go visit the stores and look through the racks and see what's out there. And that's so unique to Portland that you can spend days and days doing that without having to repeat. And I honestly think it helps all our businesses because it helps create this culture. I guess when I heard you were doing a documentary about Portland record stores, my first reaction, I have to admit, was sort of like, I don't know if that's a subject worth covering, because at first I was like, and of course it's the point of view of somebody who is deep in it, you know, 15 years of running a record store in Portland. To me, how interesting could it be, you know? But then you came into the store and you mentioned that there were 39 stores in Portland. And that was a number that I didn't even know. And I thought about that. And then I thought about 2002 when it was 6 stores, you know? And I thought about that is a phenomenon, and that is interesting. And then my mind sort of started flipping into that, like, how is this possible? Well, and then I really started thinking that we are unique, and it is strange, and it is interesting, because I didn't have the answer. And I guess for your film, I would like for you to answer that question that I probably answered pretty unsatisfactory, which is, why are there this many record stores in Portland, and how are they being sustained? Because that's beyond me. I mean, I exist in my little corner and I can't see it. So I hope you find that answer. Maybe that's the quest. I know that for my store, I mean, it's been this great honor of my life is that people treat this store like it's an extension of the sidewalk. I'm almost glad that people come in every day sometimes without buying anything. And that makes me feel really good. This is just sort of a place that people can walk through and feel really comfortable and feel like it's part of their routine is to walk through. And they don't feel pressure to buy anything, and they don't feel like I'm here to be a consumer. It's more, well, what do I do with my day? Oh, I'll go to the record store, maybe I'll see someone I know, I'll just flip through records, maybe listen to one. And I like that it's not about buying one. To me, that's profoundly satisfying, you know, and profoundly interesting to me. I'm also really honored that like tourists come through and they treat it like it's some cultural institution, which is hilarious because we're 15 years old. And you know, Second Avenue, Music Millennium, sure, they're cultural institutions at this point, but Mississippi is pretty new. But by Portland standards, where everything's changing so rapidly and being torn down and rebuilt and Mississippi, I've actually come to think of it a little more now as a cultural institution. And you know, even yesterday, just watching all the people come in and talk to each other and who hadn't seen each other in a while, and I just felt proud that I had a space where people could meet, you know. And there's something to be said for that. And I think most of the stores in Portland function that way, you know, as these neighborhood hubs. And that makes me, that's gratifying on a lot of levels. Yeah, I think another unique thing about Portland is there is this sort of backlash where we are anti-corporate. And it's sort of phony because most people end up working in advertising. You know, we do have a trickle-down economy. We have like these sort of, if you look at Portland's economy, we have these corporate masters, Nike, Adidas, Wieden and Kennedy, the biggest advertising firm in town, OHSU, which is the biggest biotech firm in the world. And that's where all the money is. And then you have the servants of those people, the people serving at restaurants or cooking for them, and the retailers. And then you have the servants of the servants, and the servants of the servants of the servants. That's the Portland economy. It's a pyramid. And the record stores are sort of at the bottom of that pyramid. That we managed to be bottom feeders, the Portland record stores. We managed to exist without having to cooperate with a lot of that corporate power at the top of the Portland economy. And that feels really good and is really satisfying. It is an interesting model, you know, to have, especially for an entertainment industry thing. I mean, I hope it's more deeper than entertainment for most people, you know, spiritual or personal or whatever, but when it gets down to it, if you look at it on a economic level, this would be classified as entertainment, you know, and not a non-necessity, and it's just, you know, ephemeral. But I think it's really cool that we've managed to have an entertainment industry in Portland of record stores that's outside of a corporate model, and because most people in most towns don't have that, you know. If you want to buy music, you have to go to a corporate store. If you want to if you want to go to the movies, you have to go to a corporate big, you know, multiplex. Portland has tons of tiny little record stores, tiny little movie theaters, tiny little bars, tiny little restaurants, you know, and there's something to be said for that.